It's the night before the caucus, and I did have some information that I wanted to go ahead and pass along to everybody. And the first thing is about this Des Moines Register Poll. Now, for those of you that don't know, this is supposed to be the gold standard of polls in that state, and it's actually gone on to predict the last 6 nominees outright. And CNN last night was supposed to have this big rollout for this poll, and at the last minute it was scrapped, and the poll wasn't released. Now, the official reason that we were given that this poll was scrapped was because Mayor Pete wasn't on some questionnaire. I think it was just some sort of human error to do with the Mayor Pete campaign. And but really, I wasn't buying that at all. It just seemed too shady. And really, I thought that the real reason why the poll didn't come out was because it had either good news for somebody and bad news for somebody else. And as things do, eventually we started having leaks on Twitter today about what the actual numbers are. And one of the leaks was showing these numbers, and apparently these numbers were confirmed by sources, but I'd still take them with a grain of salt, given that the person that things got leaked to is a pretty prominent alt-right figure. And we did have a couple of different sets of leaks, and one showed that Bernie was getting 30% of the vote, but this is the one that has been apparently confirmed by multiple sources. But again, I just take this with a grain of salt. Now, what I was trying to figure out is why wouldn't they have just posted these if the numbers aren't really all that great for Bernie? I mean, he's ahead, which is nice, and trending upwards. But I just did a quick glimpse at this poll, and I just noticed that Bernie was at the top, but I didn't notice right off that Biden just completely plummeted according to this poll. And he's over here at 13% in 4th place behind Mayor Pete, which means he wouldn't get any delegates, I don't think, if he's polling that low. Because I know there's a 15-point threshold, so at that point the Biden supporters would have to go find another candidate to go ahead and support, and that would be devastating for the Biden campaign. If this is the way things are going to play out later today, then he's got some problems. Right. Just to give everybody a sense of what I'm talking about with this poll, I'm going to play this video that kind of breaks down a little bit about what I'm talking about.
There's a Des Moines Register poll slated to come out later on Saturday. How predictive is that poll traditionally?
So the Des Moines Register poll is predictive for a reason, not necessarily the one that we think of. Polls are snapshots in time, right? They're not meant to measure who's going to win. They're measuring who's ahead at this very moment. Mm-hmm. So when the Register poll comes out on Saturday night, it will measure who's leading as we're talking right now a few days before that. Mm-hmm. And what I'm going to pay attention to most is not necessarily who's ahead and how big the margin is, but where people are moving. What we've seen in the last couple of days is that Bernie Sanders' numbers have been on an upward trajectory across the board. If that continues, then it's safe to say he's going to win the Iowa caucuses. If, say, Elizabeth Warren or Pete Buttigieg starts to make a comeback, I'm going to pay attention to that swing based on the previous Des Moines Register poll. And let me tell you, of all the pollsters in the country, the woman who conducts the Des Moines Register poll is a woman named Ann Selzer. She is the best pollster in America.
Right. That's
the same Des Moines poll has now been shelved. The reason the paper gave was that the Buttigieg campaign complained about not being named in one of the questionnaires. 1. But we think the poll has been shelved because Bernie Sanders is not just leading, but expanded his lead from last month. He has a commanding lead in Iowa, just before caucus night. Des Moines Register endorsed Elizabeth Warren. And as we heard in the clip, the pundit class was waiting for Buttigieg or Warren to show an upward swing in the polls.
If, say, Elizabeth Warren or Pete Buttigieg starts to make a comeback, I'm going to pay attention to that swing based on the previous Des Moines Register poll.
But alas, Bernie expanded his lead, and the poll is shelved. The good thing is #release the polls is now trending on Twitter. This blatant disregard of voters is not going to work. Time to turn up on caucus night, for Bernie.
Now, there is one other bit of information that we did get from the New York Times. Now, if you remember a few months back, there was a map that was released by the New York Times showing the individual donors for each of the campaigns. Now, on that map, Bernie just had complete dominance over the rest of the field, and what completely covered this thing over, with the exception of Minnesota, Delaware, some parts of South Bend, and Texas, where Beto was actually beating him in the donor amount. And since then, this is the new map. And now, as you can see, Bernie's expanded on where he was. Now, with Beto out the race, he's the leading recipient of individual donors in Texas. That cluster of Mayor Pete, Klobuchar, even that small area in Delaware of Biden has shrunk. And so much so that, again, they'd had to release a second map without Bernie, just to show that diversity among the candidates. And all of it points to a surge that we're seeing with the campaign. Now, while all this is good news, there is one other bit of information that I did want to pass along. Apparently, what's been happening is at the last minute, a bunch of the caucus sites have been moved. And, this is a problem. If people are expected or have been checking where they're supposed to go and are preparing to go into one place, and then all of a sudden things are moved at the last minute to another, it could, it could potentially suppress some turnout. And it seems like it's been specifically in areas where Bernie has been polling better than others. So it is important that if you can tomorrow, go ahead and get on text. Usually that's how we go ahead and notify people about these kinds of changes, just to make sure that everybody's informed. Let everybody know that they better check, recheck, do it all over again, just to make sure that they're in the right place. And it is important that we do have volunteers out there that can put in the work to make sure this kind of stuff does not end up hurting us on caucus night. Now, let's see, I did have one other thing. No, I don't just want to leave you all on a down note, but this just came out from South Carolina. Now, if y'all are familiar, this was supposed to be Biden's firewall. I hate that term, but yeah, this is supposed to be a solidly Biden contest. I just checked the betting odds in this state, and Biden was getting about 87% odds to win this state. And now we can see that Bernie's actually gotten to within about 5 points to be able to go ahead and tie Biden in that state. Now, for me, I have a thing. I don't like to say that anything is a sure bet, but what I can definitely say is if we go in and win in Iowa tomorrow, if we take New Hampshire after that, take Nevada, and actually take down Biden in South Carolina, I like our chances. We would have swept the first 4 contests, and going into Super Tuesday, that's huge. But like I said, the most important thing is that we do continue to put in the work that's gotten us this far. And there is still plenty of work to be done, with these little changes and all these little distracting stories. They're not going to give us a break. And we got to continue to put in the work for each of these things. And there's no letting up. And I'll go ahead and leave a link in the description. If you're not already signed up to volunteer for Bernie, we need you on text. We need you on calls. Let's go ahead. Let's win this thing.